Night nurse grabbed my arm before I could walk into my own room. She didn't say anything at first. She just looked at me, then looked down the hallway toward my daughter-in-law, then back at me. Her grip was firm, not aggressive. "Urgent, Mr. Walter," she whispered, barely moving her lips. "Don't take the medication tonight. Pour it down the sink and pretend you did." "Can you do that?" I almost laughed. I thought maybe she had the wrong patient. I was 67 years old, recovering from a minor hip procedure, 2 days away from going home. Nothing about my life felt like the kind of life where a nurse would whisper warnings to me in a hospital corridor. But her eyes weren't joking. They were the eyes of a woman who had seen something she couldn't unsee. "There's no time to explain right now," she said. "Just trust me." And then my daughter-in-law turned around at the end of the hall, saw us, and smiled. I smiled back, and I felt, for the first time in years, genuinely afraid. "My name is Walter. I spent 38 years working in logistics, building a company from nothing more than a used pickup truck and a contract with a local hardware store. By the time I sold the company, my wife Linda and I had raised 2 children, paid off the house in Greenville, put both kids through college, and still had enough left over to breathe easy for the rest of our lives. Linda passed 4 years ago. Breast cancer. She fought it the way she fought everything, quietly, with dignity, without complaint. I held her hand on a Tuesday morning in October, and when she was gone, I sat in that hospital chair for 3 hours before I could make myself stand up. After Linda, the house got very quiet. My son Marcus is 41. He married a woman named Diane about 12 years ago. They have 2 kids, my grandchildren, a boy named Caleb and a girl named Sophie, and they live about 20 minutes from me in the same county. For a while, things were good. We had Sunday dinners. I coached Caleb's Little League team for 2 seasons. Sophie used to fall asleep on my shoulder during movies. My daughter Renee is 38. She lives in Portland now, teaches middle school, calls me every Sunday without fail. She never asked me for a single thing beyond a father's love, which I gave her as freely as I knew how. I tell you about both of my children because what happened to me is not a story about bad children. It is a story about one child who lost his way and a marriage that pulled him further into the dark than I ever knew. It is also a story about how I almost didn't survive to understand any of it. The hip had been bothering me for 2 years before I finally agreed to have it looked at. My doctor, a no-nonsense woman named Dr. Okafor, told me the joint had deteriorated enough that I needed a replacement. "Nothing emergency," she said. "Routine for a man my age." 6 weeks of recovery, and I'd be moving better than I had in a decade. Marcus drove me to the hospital the morning of the procedure. He was quiet in the car, which I attributed to worry. He helped me check in, carried my overnight bag to the room, sat with me while the nurses ran through the pre-op checklist. "You're going to be fine, Dad," he said before they wheeled me back. I squeezed his hand. He squeezed back. I remember thinking in that last clear moment before the anesthesia pulled me under that I was lucky to have a son who showed up. The surgery went well. Dr. Spree. Okafor came to my room afterward, pleased with how everything looked. I was sore and groggy, but I was upright. I was whole. My daughter-in-law Diane arrived that evening with flowers and a container of soup she said she'd made from scratch, though I later found it still had the plastic seal from the grocery store deli tucked underneath. I didn't say anything. It was the thought that counted. That's what Linda always told me. Renee called from Portland. She offered to fly out, and I told her not to. It was a hip replacement, not open heart surgery. I told her I had Marcus and Diane nearby. She said okay, but something in her voice hesitated before she agreed. I didn't catch that hesitation until much later. On the second evening, a nurse named Gloria came in to give me my nighttime medications. I'd been on a mild blood thinner, a painkiller, and a vitamin supplement. Nothing unusual. Gloria was a large woman with close-cropped hair and reading glasses she wore on a beaded chain around her neck. She had the kind of steady, unhurried presence that makes you feel safe in a hospital bed. She set the small paper cup on my tray table and then stood there a moment longer than usual. "Your daughter-in-law stopped by earlier," she said, in a tone that was careful and flat. "Oh," I said, "she didn't come in to see me." "No," Gloria said. "She spoke with the duty nurse at the station." A pause. "She said she was your primary caregiver at home. Said she wanted to make sure she understood your medication schedule." "That's considerate of her," I said. Gloria looked at the cup on my tray table. Then she looked at me. "Mr. Walter, I've been a nurse for 22 years. I've worked this floor for 9 of them." She kept her voice very low. "In 22 years, I have never had a family member come to the station and ask specifically about which medications could cause complications when combined with blood thinners. Not how to manage them, not how to avoid interactions, specifically which ones and what the outcome would be." The room went very still. "She asked that?" I said. "The nurse she spoke with didn't think much of it at first, but she mentioned it to me because she knows I'm thorough." Gloria set her glasses down on the chain. "I pulled your chart and cross-checked everything we have you on. Your prescriptions are completely standard, nothing alarming." She paused again. "But I'd like you to let me hold this cup for the rest of the evening and have the pharmacist re-verify every item before you take anything tomorrow morning." I looked at the little cup. There were 3 pills in it. I had taken the same 3 pills the night before without a second thought. "Gloria," I said slowly, "are you telling me you think someone tampered with my medication?" "I am telling you," she said quietly, "that I have an instinct I've been trusting for 22 years, and tonight it is screaming at me." She picked up the cup. "Don't tell anyone we had this conversation. Take nothing tonight. I will be back in the morning." And then she walked out, and I lay in that hospital bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of my own heart beating, wondering how long it had been doing that without my gratitude. I did not sleep. I turned over every conversation I'd had with Marcus and Diane in the past 6 months, looking for the thing I had missed, and the longer I lay there, the more things began to rearrange themselves in my memory into a shape I did not want to recognize. 3 months ago, Marcus had come to me about the house, not to ask if he could have it. He was too careful for that. He came to me with a conversation about estate planning, about how things would be simpler if certain assets were transferred before I passed rather than after, about probate being expensive and time-consuming. I'd told him I already had a will and a trust in place, handled by my attorney, and that everything was organized. He'd nodded and said, of course, he wasn't suggesting anything. He just wanted to make sure I'd thought about it. I had thought it was love. That's what it had looked like. 2 months ago, Diane had started accompanying Marcus to every Sunday dinner. She had always been pleasant, but somewhat distant. Suddenly, she was warm, attentive, asking me about my health, my medications, whether my hip was keeping me up at night. I thought she was softening. I thought time was doing what time does. 1 month ago, Marcus had asked in a roundabout way whether Renee was in my will equally. I'd told him yes, of course, everything split down the middle. He'd said that was fair, though something in his face had gone very briefly flat before he recovered his smile. I thought about Renee's hesitation on the phone. I thought about Linda, who had always been a better reader of people than I was, who used to say that Diane was like a house with all the curtains drawn. You couldn't tell what was inside, only that something was. I thought about my grandchildren, Caleb and Sophie, who had no part in whatever their parents had or hadn't done, who were just children who loved their grandfather and deserved to grow up in a world where that meant something. By 4 a.m, I was not thinking about whether Gloria was right. I was thinking about whether I would survive long enough to do anything about it. Gloria came back at 6:15, before the shift change. She had a man with her, middle-aged, dark jacket, no hospital badge. He introduced himself simply as Detective Reeves and said he worked with the hospital's Patient Safety Liaison Office. Later I would learn he had been on call through an arrangement the hospital had with the county, specifically for situations like this one. He sat in the chair by my bed, and he did not waste my time. "Mr. Walter, the pharmacist, rechecked your chart last night after Gloria flagged it," he said. "Your prescribed medications are exactly what they should be. However, Gloria had the cup from the previous evening tested, the one you did not take." He paused. "One of the pills was not what it appeared to be. It was a compounded tablet containing a substance that, in combination with your blood thinner, would have caused internal bleeding, gradual enough that it would likely have presented as a complication from the surgery itself. Not immediately suspicious." I heard the words. I understood them in the way you understand something that your mind needs a moment to actually absorb. "Who put it there?" I asked. My voice was calmer than I expected. "We don't know yet," he said. "That's what I need your help with." He asked me about everyone who had access to my room. Everyone who knew my medication schedule. Everyone who had visited or called the nursing station. I told him everything. I told him about Marcus's questions about the estate, about Diane at the nursing station, about the conversation 3 months ago that I had convinced myself was concern. Detective Reeves wrote everything down without reacting. When I finished, he looked at me steadily. "Mr. Walter, I want to be direct with you because I think you're a man who can handle directness." He closed his notepad. "We're going to need a few days to build this properly. In the meantime, I'm going to ask you to behave as though nothing has changed. Can you do that?" I was 67 years old. I had built a business from nothing. I had buried my wife. I had sat in hard chairs in hard rooms and made hard decisions without anyone to lean on. "Yes," I said, "I can do that." The hardest part was not the acting. The hardest part was watching Marcus come in that afternoon, sitting in the chair beside my bed, talking about Caleb's upcoming soccer tryouts and whether the contractor had given me a fair quote on the back deck repair. He was my son. He had my mother's forehead and my father's hands. He had learned to ride a bike in our driveway. I had sat outside his bedroom door the night Linda died because I didn't know what to say and I couldn't stand the thought of him being alone with it. I looked at him and I talked about the deck. And I smiled when he mentioned Caleb, and I thought about the pill that was not a pill, and I kept my face still. Diane sat in the corner and looked at her phone and occasionally looked up at me with an expression I now understood differently. She wasn't checking in. She was assessing. When they left, I waited until the door closed, and then I sat with my hands folded in my lap for a long time. I did not cry. I want to be honest about that. I had no tears that afternoon. I had something colder and heavier than tears, something that sat in the bottom of my chest like gravel. I called Renee that evening. I didn't tell her everything. I told her I was thinking about her and that I loved her and that her mother would have been proud of the woman she'd become. Renee is not a woman who cries easily. She cried a little that night, quietly, and so did I, and neither of us said anything about it. It took 4 days. Detective Reeves and his team traced the medication irregularity to a compound pharmacy that had received an unusual order. The order had been placed by phone using a name and account number that traced back to a doctor's office Diane had worked near as a medical billing coordinator 6 years ago, an office where she still had a contact, as it turned out, someone who owed her a favor, someone who believed her when she said the order was for a family member's palliative care. On the 4th morning, Marcus and Diane arrived together at the hospital. They were met in the parking lot. I was not there for that part. I was told about it later by Detective Reeves, who said that Marcus had been visibly shaken but had not initially resisted. Diane had been very still and very composed, the way I thought someone is composed when they've already decided which version of events they are going to offer. Marcus came to see me later that day in a different kind of meeting, one with a detective present and a recorder running. He sat across from me and he looked like a man who had not slept in 4 days, which perhaps he hadn't. I looked at my son. I had rehearsed this moment, if you can call it rehearsal. I had tried to prepare some version of what I wanted to say, something measured and clear. What I actually said was simply, "Marcus, why?" He looked at his hands for a long time. When he finally spoke, what came out was not a plan or an excuse. It was something more painful than either of those things. It was a list of pressures, a construction of small failures, the business he'd started that had failed, the debt he hadn't told me about, the way Diane had slowly shifted the meaning of inheritance from something distant to something urgent, the way he had let himself believe that I was old, that I was going anyway, that it wasn't really the same as he stopped himself there. He couldn't finish the sentence. I am not sure he was capable of finishing it. Did you love me? I asked him. Not bitterly. Genuinely. At any point in this, was there love in there somewhere? He broke down then. I won't describe it in detail because whatever he had done, he was still my son, and some things belong only to the room in which they happen. Yes, he said. I know that doesn't mean anything. It means something, I said. It doesn't fix anything, but it means something. I was discharged 2 days later. Renee flew in from Portland. She didn't ask questions right away. She just walked into my hospital room, took one look at me, and hugged me the way her mother used to, not gently, but firmly, like she was trying to make sure I was still solid. I'm okay, I told her. I know, she said, not releasing the hug. I just need a minute. She drove me home. She stayed for 2 weeks. We sat on the back porch in the evenings, and she told me about her students, and I told her about the deck repair. And we didn't talk about Marcus more than we had to, which at first wasn't much, and then gradually became more as the days went by. And we both found words for the parts that needed words. The legal process is ongoing as I record this. I won't speak to the specifics of it. What I will say is that my grandchildren, Caleb and Sophie, are with Diane's sister for now, and that I have already spoken with my attorney about making sure they are provided for, regardless of what happens to their parents. They are innocent. They are 8 and 11 years old. They did not ask for any of this, and they will not pay for it if I have anything to say about it. People ask me sometimes, and more people will ask me after this, I expect, whether I forgive Marcus. I've thought about that question more carefully than almost any question I've been asked in 67 years of living. Here is what I've come to. Forgiveness and consequence are not opposites. They are not even in competition. I can forgive my son, and I am working toward that, slowly, the way you work toward something that requires more of you than you currently have, without pretending that what he chose to do carries no weight. Love does not mean the erasure of consequence. Linda taught me that. She was the most forgiving person I ever knew, and she never once confused forgiveness with permission. I think about something Gloria said to me on the morning I was discharged. She was checking my blood pressure one last time, businesslike as ever, and I thanked her in a way that I hoped communicated something close to what I actually felt, which was that she had given me the rest of my life. She waved it off, the way practical people wave off large things. But then she paused at the door and said, without turning around, "Mr. Walter, do something good with the time." I intend to. I have grandchildren who will need someone steady in their corner for the years ahead. I have a daughter in Portland who calls me every Sunday and deserves to hear her father's voice for a long time yet. I have a back deck that needs repairing, a garden that Linda started and I've been neglecting, and apparently a hip that once it finishes healing is going to work better than it has in years. I have things to do, and I've learned, later than I should have, at a cost I would never have chosen, that the people who love you are not always the ones with the loudest claim to that word. Sometimes love comes from a nurse with reading glasses on a beaded chain who trusted an instinct she'd been building for 22 years at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night for a patient she had known for 2 days. Pay attention to who shows up for you, and pay attention to how. That is what I know. That is what I have left to give. I have lived long enough to understand that the choices a person makes do not disappear when the moment passes. They settle. They accumulate. They become the architecture of who that person is. Quietly, over years, in ways that are invisible until they suddenly are not. What happened to me in that hospital room was not the beginning of anything. It was the end of a long chain of choices that my son had been making, one after another, each one pulling him further from the man I believed him to be. He did not arrive at that decision in a single night. He arrived there through months of small surrenders, surrenders of judgment, of conscience, of the voice inside him that once knew better. That voice does not disappear all at once. It gets quieter, then quieter still, until a person can no longer hear it over the noise of what they want. I do not say this to excuse what he did. I say it because I think it is the most important thing I know about how people go wrong. It is rarely a leap. It is almost always a slow walk. What saved me was not luck, though I am grateful for the timing. What saved me was a woman who had spent 22 years sharpening her attention, trusting her instincts, and refusing to look away from the thing that felt wrong, even when looking away would have been easier. Gloria did not save my life because she was in the right place. She saved my life because she had spent 2 decades becoming the kind of person who notices and then acts on what she notices without waiting for permission or certainty. That is not a gift. That is a practice. That is what a person builds through years of showing up and paying attention and caring about the outcome even when no one is watching. I think about that often now. The people who end up mattering most in our lives are rarely the ones who made the loudest promises. They are the ones who quietly built themselves into something reliable, something honest, something useful, and then showed up at the moment when it counted. Marcus had every opportunity to build that in himself. He had resources, education, a father who loved him without condition, and would have helped him through any legitimate hardship without a second thought. What he lacked was not opportunity. What he lacked was the willingness to sit with discomfort long enough to move through it honestly. Difficulty is not the enemy of a good life. The unwillingness to face difficulty honestly, that is where things begin to break down. I am 67 years old and I am still learning this. I am learning it in the garden Linda started, where things grow slowly and require patience and die if you ignore them. I am learning it in phone calls with Renee, who has built a life of quiet integrity that I admire more than I have probably told her. I am learning it in the faces of my grandchildren, who deserve to grow up knowing that a person's character is not inherited. It is chosen again and again in moments both large and small. We do not get to choose what happens to us. We get to choose what we do with it and what kind of person we are in the doing. That choice is always available. It is never too late to make it. That is what I know. That is what I am still building toward. I hope it is useful to you, too.